Hi everybody, my name is Joshua Michael Waringa. I am a caddy at a couple golf clubs and I play a lot of golf myself. And I asked the question, what are the actual health effects of golf? So today I will be going over the history, just because introduction, mental and physical health of it, and then the conclusion. Golf started as a practice in the 15th century Scotland. It was a practice of using a stick to hit rocks and pebbles over sand dunes and railroad tracks. However, due to the fact that it was believed Britain was about to invade Scotland, King James II in 1457 actually banned the sport because people were neglecting training. However, nobody even listened to him. This led to King James IV in 1502 giving the sport the royal seal of approval, and he actually started playing golf. He even purchased the first golf ball and golf club set that were ever made that we have proof of. And this led an explode in popularity. Everybody in Scotland was doing it everywhere, especially now that it was endorsed by royalty. And you had King Charles I of England and Mary Queen of Scots of France actually introduce it over in those locations as well, which meant it was blowing up all over Europe, and from there it only spread. And eventually this culminated in the sort of modern era, starting in 1764 with the opening of St. Andrews, where they used baskets instead of flags at their pins, as the first 18-hole golf course. And realistically, who gives a shit? Well, believe it or not, a couple people play golf, including myself. So every year, that little golf club we were talking about, St. Andrews, which was the first 18-hole golf course, hosts something called the Global Golf Participation under their golf name, or their association name RNA, which stands for Royal and Ancient Golf Club of St. Andrews. And last year, for 2024, they said that 62.3 million adults and kids participated in golf or engaged with golf. That's a couple people. And this, of course, is going to start with mental health. So this next part, I'm mostly going to be talking about stressors that can affect people. And most of the science here came from The Psychology of Golf Performance Under Pressure, written by Paul Gorsinski, Claudia L. Reardon, and Cindy Miller-Aaron. Apologies if I butchered any of those. Just kill me if I got them wrong. And because everybody is going to fit somewhere on that spectrum, these are going to be at the very high end, low end being no change to your mental health. Everybody's going to fit on the spectrum somewhere. So at the highest end, main stressors that they identified are your performance, as if you can't perform, your job is gone. Your financials, which if you can't provide for your family and friends, then obviously that's going to have an impact on your mental health. Your time away from family and friends, believe it or not, you don't get to see them very often when you're at a high level and you have to travel for work all the time. And the golf is ever changing, so that change, if it ever ends up screwing you over, you're obviously going to show that in your mental health. Effect of this that they've identified: psychological distress, anxiety, depression, substance abuse, and sleep disturbances are all pretty common. And you're at higher risk if you are female, you have a family history of depression or mental disorder, you fail at a high level. That would be astronomical, make a really big impact on your mental health. Or if you have little support system, a very small support system that's not able to handle the amount of stress that's coming from this job. Now, considering the fact that 99.99999% of golfers are not going to be impacted by anything on the last page, the largest effect to us is the fact we are out in nature. Yes, believe it or not, just being in nature has the largest psychological and mental health effect of anything that's tied to golf. For this part, taking most of it from Nature and Mental Health and Ecosystem Service Perspective by Gregory and Breitman et al. Apologies if I butchered the name. And so what they found in that article, first main benefit of being in nature. There is a major reduction in the amount of stress produced by the body. There are psychological benefits. So not only just things like reduction in stress, but also it can be linked to things like better sleep and higher quality sleep and improved mental health. And finally, lower mental illness. Now, this is not just the prevalence of mental illness. It can help avoid mental illness. However, it's more so the severity of mental illness. For things like anxiety, depression, ADHD, which also have other factors like your gender, age, and socioeconomic status, it can help with all of that. However, there is a second thing that they found that's also very important and linked to golf. Physical activity, probably the second most important thing. Just getting physical activity is very important. That's not how an arm works. Being physically active, believe it or not, can have a really big impact on your mental health. Most of this is going to come from Physical Activity Mental Health, Scott A. Paluska and Thomas L. Schwenks. In that article, the largest two things that they found that correlate to physical activity on the mental health: depression. Believe it or not, you cannot prevent depression just by being physically active. However, you can help subside these symptoms. Anxiety, and for more, I guess, panic disorders as well, can be reduced or even completely omitted just by getting physical activity. Combine that with nature, golfers must be pretty happy people, right? So obviously, based on that, obviously the more golf you play, the happier you must be as a person, but then you remember how much you have to pay, and I think that's about right. Physical effects. And of course, what better way to start off the physical effects than with the amount of muscle you're going to build playing this stupid game. Now, when it comes to the actual relationship between muscle mass, muscle endurance, muscle strength, all compared to golf, there's really not a ton to say, unfortunately. This data is coming from relationships between golf and health, scrolling review by A.D. Murray et al. However, there are some. So you've got proprioception. This is essentially the ability of your body to know where something is without looking at it. So like closing my eyes, I know that my arm is out straight, I know my arm is bent. That is what proprioception is. There is an increase in that. Muscle endurance. There's also an increase in the amount of muscle endurance. And this can be seen due to the fact that playing a round of golf can take up to 5 hours, and especially if you're walking and carrying clubs, it can help increase with muscle endurance. Also see an increase in muscle function. And all of these can be seen especially in older people, though there isn't as much impact in younger people, as it's just not as good for physical training. Things like muscle mass and bone density have not seen any sort of impact in younger people. Sometimes in elderly people, but there's no impact in anybody under the age of 50. But rest assured that there may actually be a way to get some sort of muscle mass. It's just not going to be upper body. So I told you I am a caddy at multiple golf courses, and believe it or not, we do quite a bit of walking. In fact, in the average round, it's about 4 to 6 miles of walking. That's a little bit. And every bag is roughly between 25 and 50 pounds, roughly the same as about a weight vest. Or in other words, we created intense walking. Congratulations. This not only increases the calories that we burn, it's going to help increase that strength and endurance that we were talking about. And this can actually create muscle mass in the legs if you do it enough. Multiple bags a day can definitely do that. This can help increase the balance of the person. And considering that a round can take roughly 4 to 5 hours each time, it definitely helps with cardiovascular health. However, considering that each round can last 4 to 5 hours, there's another concern. And one more little thing I forgot to mention before we move on. I was looking into whether or not carrying a bag can cause things like scoliosis, and it doesn't seem like there's any actual correlation there. However, it can worsen it, and other back problems can occur because of it. It's just not going to help. It only really matters if you're caddying like me, because otherwise it's just not enough activity. Unless you're over the age of 60 or so. This little guy up here just looks like a weird ear. He's sweating now. That's right, we're going to be talking about skin cancer next. What a happy topic. People are not all affected the exact same way by UV radiation and what can happen. So, if you do have more melanin producing sites making your skin darker, there are going to be 5 key areas that are going to be more heavily impacted by UV radiation and thus will have the same odds of getting skin cancer as people as white and pasty as me. That is the inside of the mouth, underneath your fingernails and toenails, the palms of your hand, the soles of your feet, and your groin. Luckily, none of these locations are really exposed to the sun. That's kind of why our body-made melanocytes cover almost everywhere else in our body. Melanocytes, by the way, are the sites that produce melanin. Melanin is what's helping protect us from that UV radiation, hence why it occurs more commonly in places where they get more sun exposure like the equator. I say that the odds of getting skin cancer are quite different. I really do mean they're quite different. 1 in 38 for white people, 1 in 167 for Hispanic people, and 1 in 1,000 for black people. This is specifically talking about melanoma, which is one of the 3 kinds of skin cancer I'll be talking about today. And this one is one of the rarer ones. However, this is the one with probably the most solid basis for what we can put numbers to. And the other thing that's really going to impact your chances of getting skin cancer that I did not mention before was if it runs in your family. And that is something that really depends on the severity and the prevalence in your family tree. So if that is something you have, you should look into that. However, there's not really numbers we can put to it. And the other ones also get really kind of fringy when you try to put numbers to them, but they are significantly less in people with more melanin in their skin. Now, there are 3 primary types of skin cancer to worry about, and they can be broken down into 2 different types. You've got melanocyte and keratinocyte. Keratinocyte can then even be broken down further into basal cell and squamous cell. So the way that your skin looks roughly is going to be something like this. Up here you have what are called squamous cells, which look like fried eggs, with the yolk being the nucleus. And then on the bottom, you're going to have these much longer cells. These are going to be your basal cells, and these make up your epidermis and your dermis, respectively. Now, basal cell, the most common type, is going to be penetrating all the way down to this deeper layer, and these are going to be the cells that are mutated. In squamous cell, which is the less common kind, the UV radiation is going to affect these squamous cells, and that is going to cause your cancer to grow. It's less common to have squamous cell, even though the squamous cell is the kind that gets the most amount of radiation, because that's what this is designed for. Now, melanocyte is the other kind of skin cancer. It makes up about 1% of cancers, and that's what happens when a melanocyte, which creates melanin, which are strewn amongst your basal cells underneath your squamous cells, gets targeted by UV radiation, it mutates, and it becomes a cancer. It's so much rarer because there's so few of them compared to how many keratinocytes you have for basal cell and squamous cell carcinomas. Now, in an article published by Bruce K. Armstrong and Annie Crust called Sun Exposure and Skin Cancer and the Puzzle of Cutaneous Melanoma, a Perspective on Fears et al. Mathematical Model of the Age and Ultraviolet Effects of the Incidence of Skin Cancer Among Whites in the United States, American Journal of Epidemiology. Say that 10 times fast. We get a nice little breakdown on the incidence of why. Conclusions that they came to is that melanocytes are more highly associated with high intensity UV light, whereas keratinocytes, both of which are more linked to more sunlight, so having more exposure to UV radiation and longer exposure to UV radiation. The rest of the article really goes to show how being in more UV radiation is going to cause more incidence of skin cancer, and that people who live near the equator and on skin that is more exposed to UV radiation, you are more likely to find skin cancers. All of this really going to show that the more that you spend time in the sun, you are more likely to develop skin cancer. So us caddies are screwed. And for the final section today, we have injury. The prevalence of injury in golf for amateur golfers is roughly 15.8% to 40.9%. It really varies. Kind of hard to put a number on. And the number one injury is overuse. So mostly from playing too much golf and not warming up properly. Specifically, injuries to the spine and lower back are going to be the most common at around 36% of them. And some of the other ones, you've got the fact that golf is the most likely sport to get you struck by lightning. So, and fatally wound, that is. And then also you've got golf carts. And while golf carts are usually responsible for about 15,000 injuries per year in the US, not all of those are tied to golf, so not all can be associated with golf. In fact, the majority likely are not, as golf carts are allowed on roads in a lot of US states. Before I forget to mention, those statistics on the last page came from the comprehensive review from Murray et al. Also, people wonder about getting hit by a golf ball and how prevalent that is. Odds of that happening are about 1 in 4,500 on a golf course, and this is, of course, is going to change depending on layout and where you are on a course, because being on a range is going to obviously come with less risk than if you're in a blind spot down a fairway. And while rare, only about 15% of the total roughly 40,000 people a year who go into the hospital for golf-related injuries, they are usually more serious than any of the other ones, as the other ones are mostly lower back issues, as stated prior. So starting with the mental health side of things, you can see impacts in especially depression and anxiety disorders. However, there's no major effect that comes from that. Most of the major effects are coming from the fact that you are getting physical activity and you are outside, especially in nature. Those are going to have the largest impacts on your mental health. As for your physical health, it's more or less the same. You are getting physical activity, but most of the impact that you are getting is actually coming from the walking and the carrying around a 50-pound bag. Or in other words, if you ride a cart, you're mitigating a lot of that physical growth. And when I talk about physical growth, I'm not meaning anything for anybody less than about the age of 50, because if you're under that age, there's really no impact to anything unless you're caddying, which sees you do a lot more of this. It's more repetition rather than weight in the first place. In fact, the major impacts of golf that we saw here actually might end up being negative. The prevalence of skin cancers are quite common among golfers, especially if you don't wear sunscreen and other protective measures for that, as well as the other slightly less important getting struck by lightning, getting hit by balls, or practicing so much that you hurt yourself, which are the actual impacts of playing golf and some of the only impacts that we saw from the actual sport of playing golf, whereas the rest of it can mostly be attributed to the walking and being in nature. And that's really about it. There isn't really a ton to say on the subject. The more I looked into it, the more I found that there's less and less to say about it. And if you really want to know more about everything that I talked about today, because I was very surface level with it, go ahead and look in the description. You can find all of the links to every single article that I used for this. I will warn you, most of them are quite wordy, as they are official publications compared to whatever ragtag thing I threw together here. And I think that'll do it for today.